In the rich tapestry of history, there exists a story so peculiar, so drenched in factional fervor and religious extremism, that it almost feels closer to folklore than fact. Yet it was real, and its echoes linger to this day. This is the story of the Siege of Münster, a city that became a crucible of faith, fear, and fanaticism during one of Europe's most tumultuous eras, the 16th century. Now imagine this. You are a citizen of Münster, a small yet fortified city in what we now know as Germany, in the year 1534. The Protestant Reformation is spreading like wildfire across Europe, igniting both hope and chaos. It's an age of religious upheaval, where Martin Luther's teachings have shattered centuries of Catholic orthodoxy. But as a magnet attracts iron filings, turmoil draws opportunists. The fracturing of belief didn't just open doors to theological reform, it opened the floodgates to extremism. Here lies the question: how far would people go to build a heaven on earth, if it meant condemning others to hell? The city of Münster was, at first, a Protestant stronghold, its citizens eager to embrace reform. However, this was no quiet theological shift. Among the wave of new religious ideas came the Anabaptists, a sect that diverged sharply from mainstream Protestant teachings. To the Anabaptists, infant baptism was invalid, and the only true baptism was one made by a knowing adult. To them, all present governments, secular and religious, were corrupt and destined for imminent divine wrath. It wasn't a reformation they sought. It was an apocalypse and rebirth, a total reset of society. The Anabaptists, led by a preacher named John Matthies, found fertile ground in Münster. Matthies claimed to be a prophet, and though his messages were often cryptic, they carried a strange magnetism. He predicted the coming of God's kingdom on earth and declared Münster the New Jerusalem. The city swelled with fervor as converts from surrounding regions came, drawn by promises of salvation, of an imminent utopia. Songs, chants, and sermons filled the streets. But this utopia came at a cost. Once the Anabaptists seized power in Münster, they didn't merely reform the city, they transformed it into a theocratic dystopia. Opposition was crushed. Residents were commanded to surrender all private possessions to be held in common. This was a society without mine or yours. The rule of John Matthies was strict and absolute. Morality patrols roamed the streets, ensuring compliance with the new order. But John Matthies was convinced his divine vision demanded something more ambitious: a confrontation with the armies of the cursed who lived outside Münster's gates. As the Catholic Prince-Bishop Franz von Waldeck assembled forces to besiege the city, Matthies declared, "Do not fear. God has chosen this city as the site of his final victory." What followed was nearly too bizarre to believe. Against the advice of his most trusted followers, John Matthies rode out of Münster on Easter Sunday, 1534. Alone and armed with nothing but faith, he intended to face the Prince-Bishop's army. The result was predictable, if devastating: his death. But here lies a curious truth of zealotry. Its power does not fade with the fall of one leader. It often grows stronger under the weight of martyrdom. Matthies's death paved the way for an even more radical figure to take his place. That figure was John van Leiden, Matthies's charismatic disciple. Where Matthies had been a prophet, van Leiden was a king, or so he declared. Crowned in a gaudy ceremony, he styled himself as King of the New Jerusalem, ruler of God's chosen people. The city became his court, and what followed were shocking decrees: a forced system of polygamy, public displays of punishment, and elaborate royal celebrations, even as Münster starved under siege. Imagine the city now, its walls beset by cannon fire, and its people ruled by a self-proclaimed monarch who preached freedom through submission, salvation through suffering. Yet inside these walls, there was both collapse and cohesion. The citizens danced on the edge of despair, convinced their suffering was part of a divine plan. Death loomed not only from the enemy's weapons, but from van Leiden's decrees. To dissent was to meet the sword. But the people outside Münster, those looking in, were equally awed and repelled by what was occurring. The siege dragged on for months. It was not just religious leaders or generals who took note, but merchants, peasants, chroniclers across Europe. This strange city became a theater of moral debate. To some, it displayed the dangers of faith unmoored from reason. To others, it was a compelling, if terrifying, example of ultimate human conviction. Now, you may ask, how could this tale end? Could a kingdom built upon such fragile foundations endure? As one might guess, the ending was dark for Münster and its people. By 1535, after over a year of siege, the prince-bishop's forces breached the city walls. What they discovered was a shattered utopia. Van Leiden himself was captured. But his punishment? Well, let's tread carefully here. Not for reasons of gore, but for something deeper. Van Leiden's public execution is widely remembered, but not just for its brutal methods. It was seen by the authorities of the day as a message, an etching of fear into both the physical realm and memory itself. Iron cages hung on St. Lambert's Church held not just Van Leiden, but also his lieutenants, dangling out of time as grim reminders of the futility of rebellion. These cages, remarkably, still cling to the church spire to this day. Empty now, they whisper the echoes of fear, faith, and fanaticism. They are artifacts, not of Münster's utopia promised, but of a cautionary tale realized. But before we conclude, a question lingers. Why does this story endure? Why does the Siege of Münster, a small city's year-long tragedy, still capture imaginations? Perhaps it's because it forces us to confront fundamental, unsettling truths about the human condition, about belief, power, and our capacity for both hope and horror. It is easy to think of the past as primitive and ourselves as evolved, but the truth lives in the cracks of every age. The line between faith as enlightenment and faith as tyranny, between order and chaos, is far thinner than we think. And so, we must look at Münster, not just as a city that fell, but as a mirror, a story of heights never reached and depths never forgotten. The cages remain, the echoes persist, and the question hangs: have we learned? The Siege of Münster was more than an episode in religious history. It was a crucible of human ambition, a stage where the interplay of faith, fear, and fanaticism unfolded for the world to see. And in the shadows of Münster's broken walls, history speaks and reminds us yet again to tread carefully where belief meets power. So now I ask you, listener, how far would we go today in the name of our own convictions?